Evening. My name is George Kalinka. I work for the Woodridge Public Library. I'm the head of adult services, and I'm honored to be here this evening and introduce John Cebula. I think many of you already know John from his many excellent birding programs he's presented in the past here for us through Zoom. Uh, John is a local naturalist. He's actually coming to us right now from his home in Glen Ellen, and he's going to explore the rapid global decline of insects, the critical role of species like the monarch butterfly, which happens to be Illinois' state insect and a current candidate for the Endangered Species Act protection, uh, along with potential solutions to reverse this very concerning trend. So, having said that, John, I'm going to pass it along to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, George. Thank you a lot. Well, I'm so glad to be back with Woodridge. And the title of this presentation might be a little hyperbole, but maybe not. I call it Apocalypse Now, the Disappearance of Insects. I start a lot of my programs with this quote from Doug Ptolemy: "Our ignorance of natural history is a cultural norm." I'm always surprised when I talk to young people at elementary school, even through high school, who are unaware of the nature around them to the point that they really can't tell me a robin is a robin. And there's so many other examples. And I think Doug's quote is especially true when we come talk about insects. Many people, and I use the word abhor about insects, they think they all sting, they bite, they eat our crops, they spread disease, they're just plain icky. And to a limited extent, this is true, but these are stereotypes. In fact, this picture of a wasp on a flower, start my video. I thought it started. Whoops.
Oh, yeah, John, we're not seeing you. I think you just need to turn on your video.
Let me go back. I thought it was on. Start my video.
There you go. I can see you. Although I can't see your screen, by the way.
It says I'm screen sharing.
Yeah, it looks like it's at the top there.
Anything?
I see it. It's in a little window. I think you just need to make it bigger.
Really? How's that?
Still kind of small.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, George, I'm sorry, because it fills my screen here at home.
Yeah, I see it. It's bigger now. I think you just want to go ahead and maximize the or start your slide presentation. I can
Yes.
see. Yeah, and make that your main slide.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I can see it.
Okay. I don't know what happened. This is what I saw. Well, okay. I apologize for all that. So, as I was saying, uh, I think that Doug Ptolemy's quote is especially true when we consider insects. And a few insects have their champions. I have a few here. Monarch butterflies. This is a caterpillar. Lady beetles. This is an Asian lady beetle. Western honeybee. There was just a report that about 70% of honeybee hives have collapsed. There's a bunch of if, ands, and buts for all of these that I'm going to try to address in this program. Insects are important. and four major things they do. I list here. They're major pollinators of food and crops, both and in the natural environment. They're decomposers of waste. They help recycle nutrients. They're major natural pest controls. They are food for species humans consider good or desired, birds, for example. Indirectly, if you eat fish, especially freshwater fish, you depend on mosquitoes. They're kind of at the basis of the food chain for game fish and freshwater fish that we eat. This may not be the best picture. This is a rabbit I found along a trail in Florida, recently dead, and you can see some flies visiting it. And a week later, this is what the rabbit looked like. It was decomposed. I know that's kind of unappetizing, but it's important to realize that what those flies were doing was helping getting rid of the carcass and at the same time recycling the nutrients that were locked up in the rabbit's body. One of my sons taught me the importance of this. He wasn't really good at math, but if you put a dollar sign in front of numbers, he immediately understood where you're coming from. And I think insects might be an example of this for a lot of people. So these are just some odd facts, but they help paint a picture of the importance of insects. They pollinate 75% of crops. These are dated numbers. I haven't accounted for inflation, but that's almost $600 billion a year worldwide. In the United States, it's about $60 billion a year. And one particular kind of beetle, and I found the species of this beetle once in DuPage County at Herrick Lake Forest Preserve. They're called dung beetles. If you know Egyptian art and you see those scarabs, those are dung beetles, and they get their name because that's what they feed their larvae. They find cattle dung, they break off a piece, they roll it to a hole in the ground, they bury it, and they lay an egg on it. And they're perform about in 2024, last year, that was about $580 million in service for the cattle industry. The irony is that more than half of the American cattle, US cattle, are treated with a chemical which is toxic to dung beetles, and which is incidentally one reason why the American beef industry has a hard time selling product in Europe, because European countries don't want their meat products to have been exposed to these various toxins or chemicals. The importance of insects really goes back a long way. Gilbert White wrote in 1789, the most insignificant insects and reptiles are of much more consequence and have much more influence in the economy of nature than the incurious are aware of, and are mighty in their effect. Gilbert White, incidentally, is often considered the first English language nature writer, but he recognized the importance of insects. And of course, not too long ago, the Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson claimed that insects were the little things that run the world. I think it's important to understand something about how insects and plants interact. About the time that the first land plants appear, we start finding the first insect fossils. And of course, insects are small, so it's hard to find good fossils, but they have been found. Relatively short time later, geological terms, 80 million years later, we see insects with wings. And then, and this is interesting, about the time we have flowering plants, we start seeing fossils of butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, bees. All these insects are important pollinators of plants. It's really hard to exaggerate the significance of this. Plants and insects have an interesting relationship. Plants don't want to be eaten. They do all kinds of things. They have tough fibers in their body. They're hard to chew, or they have spines. Many of them are distasteful and produce chemicals. At the same time, a limited number of insects are able to adjust. For example, monarchs feed on milkweeds, which are toxic to a lot of animals. I have a program on milkweeds. There's about 450 insects that depend on it, which sounds like a lot, but really in the scope of things is a limited number of insects. Black swallowtails, one of my favorite butterflies, feed on members of the carrot family. I grow parsley and dill and fennel specifically to attract these swallowtails. And many flowers depend on specific insect pollinators. For example, snapdragons depend on bumblebees. And there's something else about bumblebees I'll be sharing in a little bit. So, and there's a photograph of one of my black swallowtail caterpillars a year or two ago on some parsley I grew. Insects are a very diverse group. I can only find estimates, but roughly 900,000 species have already been described. Scientists are estimating that that's only about 20% of all insect species. I've talked to entomologists, insect specialists, who agree that if one of us went out in our backyard and tried to collect every kind of insect we could find, including the ones that we could barely see, odds are excellent we'd find a species or two that hasn't been described by science. In terms of all described species, plants and animals, insects represent about 80%. Beetles are the largest group of insects. In fact, they're the largest group of any organism, and there's between 250,000 and 400,000 beetle species. And each one plays a unique role in the ecology of an area. They may overlap, but they do have distinctions. And I think the final little note here is important, that only about 1% of all insect species are considered pests by the United States Department of Agriculture. Now, why so many and why such diversity? Well, it's, the saying is don't put all your eggs in one basket. Looking at bees, we have over 500, bee species in Illinois. If one declines, another one increases in numbers until a balance is established. The bees are active at different times of year, at different times of day. They have different preferences of flowers. A real danger that we'll get to later is as non-native species replace the native ones, diversity declines. It puts the ecosystem in danger of collapse. It at least compromises the ecosystem. I know a lot of you like birds, and so you're probably familiar about the study that was published about 6 years ago that documented the decline in North American bird populations. We lost roughly a quarter of our bird population, gone. What did not receive a lot of attention, perhaps we should, and it's been called the insect apocalypse. So I'm going to ask yourself, I'm going to ask yourself some questions. When's the last time you've had a cross-country road trip that you've had to stop to clean insects off the windshield? My family used to go from Minneapolis to Pittsburgh every summer, usually at end of June, beginning of July, predating the interstate highway system. And I remember my father, every time we stopped for gas, he'd get off and scrub the insects off the car window. And sometimes even before we got to this gas station. Or when was the last time you saw children catching lightning bugs in a jar? The only time I see it is on TV and commercials. And when was the last time you saw moths swarming under a street lamp? What scientists have done is start looking at some research that was published first in 1990. So it predates the bird study. But what it shows is that since about the 3 decades, they started in the 1970s, the study had been done in Germany, and depending on the season and where they were taking the survey, they found a 75 to 95% decline in insect biomass. That is the total weight of the insects in an area. That word baseline is important. I'll need to explain what that is. That's pretty much what it sounds like. What are you comparing it to? George and I were talking about earlier about the birds I've seen the last 15 years or so. And I've noted every year in DuPage County, I see fewer and fewer species. Partly it's because I am out of the area when I'm out of the area. It's partly because as I'm getting older, I don't go out as often perhaps, but it's quite interesting that in 2011, well, I'll take 2012. In 2012, I saw 90 species of birds in DuPage County by the end of April. This year, I've seen 37. So the baseline is, what are you comparing it to? Now, there's critics who object to the word insect apocalypse. They think it's too strong. They do accept some of the studies, but they're critical because they say, well, these studies have been done in Europe and North America in disturbed areas, urban areas, agriculture areas. They say, okay, and we know some insects do have dramatic population shifts. We've documented that. They also say there's a publication bias. The news media likes to give us bad news. At the same time, they can see that research is suggesting that some insects are declining in some regions. These are the critics. The recent support has supported the idea that there is a collapse in insect populations worldwide. And these are just some little factoids. One study has concluded that maybe 500,000 insect species have gone extinct in the last century and a half. Another study concluded we're losing about 9% of our land-dwelling insect population each decade. And another study kind of supported it. It was a study of the papers themselves and said, well, we're probably losing 1 to 2% of our insect population a year. There's been a lot of research and 18,000 papers, and they all document declines in insects and try to express what the causes might be. Now, these declines, incidentally, affect mostly terrestrial insects. Aquatic insects and dragonflies and damselflies are a group that have a lot of fans. Seem to be doing okay. One suggestion has been that most countries have enforced clean water rules, and so the water systems are improving. I know here in DuPage County, a lot of the dams that were built during the 1930s as part of the Civil Conservation Corps are being taken down. The streams, East Branch, West Branch, Salt Creek, and so on, are becoming free-flowing as they originally were. And as that happens, many forms of wildlife, including insects, return. Unfortunately, what's another aquatic insect? It's mosquitoes. The good news is that you're looking here at some of the best natural mosquito controls we have, dragonflies and damselflies. It is hard to sometimes, though, to compare these different studies because their methods differ. What they're looking at differs. Some studies only looked at the presence or absence of insects. They looked at diversity, how many kinds. They look at biomass. They might be looking at different times of the year, so different variables. But the consensus is insects are declining. Now, why are they declining? Well, if you've been involved in any kind of environmental project, you've heard all of these before. It's true for just about any animal, maybe plant. There's habitat loss and destruction, pollution, climate is changing. All these things have been identified as reasons insects are declining. It might depend on the species. What's true for one might not be true for another. A recent hypothesis is that has come out that in agricultural areas, there's a lot of nitrogen and phosphate in the soil that seems to be tied to decreasing insect populations. Of course, agriculture puts a lot of these chemicals in the soil as fertilizer. A study published last year by University of Illinois documented, though, that a lot of the herbicides that are used and pesticides that are used get in the soil, but then they slowly evaporate and in the air, and then they drift, and so they're killing trees some distance removed from where the chemicals were applied. Another study came to the conclusion that biomass is driven by a lot of very interwoven, complex climate conditions, and while temperate zone insects are threatened, so are tropical ones. In fact, tropical ones might even be more threatened. And here's a little bee, a sweat bee. You might want to start looking at them. They're kind of pretty and very small. The flower this bee is on is a Florida flower that's only about an inch in diameter. So you can see this sweat bead's less than a quarter of an inch in diameter. The biologist Nick Haddad from Michigan State University is a specialist in butterfly conservation, and he recounted in one of the chapters in his book, The Last Butterflies, a problem that in California, where they were trying to help this one butterfly by planting host plants along highways, they discovered the butterflies weren't using the host plants along the highway. And when they looked a little further into it, they found out that these plants were absorbing exhaust fumes, et cetera, from the cars and trucks, making them unsavory to the butterflies. So the butterflies were still only using plants some distance from the roadways. And he wrote, I suspect that a poor understanding of natural history is a common feature in our struggles with conservation of many of the rarest insects and plants. We get a little smug sometimes, I think, talking about protected areas, our forest preserves, our national parks, our wildlife reserves. They're not isolated or immune. What's happening in the surrounding community and affects what happens in the preserved areas. And all of these things, agriculture, use of resources, energy production, the presence of people, and finally, diseases, problematic species, all of these impact the protected areas. Also, the animals themselves don't recognize, let's say, property lines. You know, a bird might nest in one place in a forest preserve, but then it goes out along the highway and it eats, scavenges an animal that had been eating rodent poison. And so it introduces the rodent poison into itself and into the system. And we're going to talk a little bit more about honeybees, but I ran across a study done in Israel that showed that the introduction of honeybees resulted in fewer visits to flowers by native bees. That's a fancy way of saying the honeybees, which are a non-native species throughout most of Europe and are non-native species in Europe. I shouldn't say throughout Europe, introduced, but they're non-native in Europe. They're non-native in North America. They're very problematic. Now, there's laws that seem to apply. Endangered Species Act, there's farm bills, there's a federal insecticide act. People who have studied it said it's not always enforced as much as it should be. Bees are the #1 pollinators, and they deserve special attention. Almost a third of our native bumblebees are threatened with extinction. I saw just this week a claim that actually it's almost 90% of our bumblebees are now threatened with extinction. Quarter of European bumblebees are also threatened with extinctions. In the United States, our honeybee colonies have reduced by almost half, more than half. And this is a point that I've been hinting at, and I really think we need to consider, is that honeybees are a threat to our native bee species. Now, honeybees get a lot of attention. This was a cover story in a newspaper down in Florida a few months ago, and it's about the decline in honeybees in Florida. I don't know if you're aware of this. I was surprised to find out that a major source of income for beekeepers is renting out their beehives. In Michigan and California, Oregon, Washington, especially where there's fruit trees, beekeepers bring in their beehives. They stay in the groves as long as there's flowers. They pollinate the flowers, and then the hives are put on a truck and taken to someplace else. Perhaps you can already guess why that's a problem. If there's a disease, that disease is being spread. In 2006, we started hearing about what's called colony collapse disorder, and they reported losses of 30 to 70% of their hives. I've seen this week a prediction that about 70% of hives were lost this last winter. And about half of these losses were inconsistent with known cause of honeybee death. And the various causes have been pesticides. We like to blame pesticides, viruses, those are diseases, mites, and climate change. It might possibly be that depending on where the hives were, one or more of these may be in effect, but not all of them. Again, it's dangerous to generalize about that. A number of groups, though, have raised concerns about honeybees. The Xerces Society, which is to insects and other invertebrates what the National Audubon Society is to birds, has this on their website. Keeping honeybees to save the bees is like keeping chickens to save birds. Especially in relatively the last 100 years, as farming has become industrial, beekeepers have rented out their colonies. The honeybees aren't in danger of extinction, but many of our native bees are. And honeybees generally outcompete native bees for a variety of reasons, if for no other reason that their colonies are so large. And it's been documented that they introduce and spread diseases that they're immune to, but our native bees are not. And if you're a gardener, this might impress you. Honeybees pollinate about 5% of the flowers they visit. Bumblebees about 95% of the flowers they visit. One of the reasons is honeybees are much hairier. Bumblebees are much hairier than honeybees, so they get more pollen on their body. They're also a little bit bigger and stronger. They force their way into flowers and are able to do what honeybees are not able to do. Bumblebees are able to pollinate things that honeybees can't, like tomatoes, a lot of squashes, anything in that nightshade family. Honeybees are pretty good with fruit trees, but think about it. Most of the fruit trees that we grow in the United States are themselves non-native species that were brought over from Europe. This bumblebee is a bumblebee called a brown belted bumblebee. I like it because you can see the brown belt on it. It's on a liatris in my garden. Uh, it's important to understand insect lifestyles, and each is a little bit different. Um, in the fall, young honey bumblebee queens leave the hive and they enter what's called diapause. They go into piles of leaves to spend the winter. A lot of other insects do that. It's not really, diapause is not really hibernation. It's simply a slowing down of the metabolism. If we have a warm winter, what happens is that the bees are burning up their fats faster than if it was colder. Uh, it's not so warm that they can leave and go out and find, nectar and pollen or anything to live on, but they're using up the fat that they build up in the fall. And so when it does finally warm up and the bees can leave diapause, if they haven't died, they come out much weaker and more susceptible to diseases, predators, and that sort of thing. Of all the insects out there, probably butterflies and even moths are an important group. And a little basic ecology, they're considered important pollinators, probably moths more so than butterflies. Their caterpillars are a very important food source for our native songbirds. 100% of the perching birds in our area are considered insect eaters. You're saying, well, what about the cardinals? They come and eat my sunflower seeds. The adults come and eat your sunflower seeds, but the adults feed their young, their nestlings, insects. And again, this is one area that's been studied a little bit. 15 years ago, a study was published by the International Union for Conservation, and it reported a third of the insects, European species, butterflies and moths, are declining, and 81 of them are now threatened with extinction. So now we come to the monarchs, and I imagine a lot of you saw Anderson Cooper's piece, was it last Sunday on CBS on 60 Minutes. He did a wonderful piece, but there's a little more to the story. Their numbers have declined very dramatically by 90%. When I put this program together the first time, the wintering area in the Mexican mountains had declined from 45 acres, which is what it covered in 1975, to 5.5 acres. A year or two ago, it was down to less than an acre. And there's a lot of reasons for the decline. There's illegal logging in the wintering site. There's climates changing. The mountain area where they are able to survive the winter is warming up, so they become active and they burn body fat, but there aren't flowers, there aren't nectar sources to feed them. The energy they expend surviving really makes them unfit to reproduce. Butterflies aren't the only one. In fact, they're not the most threatened species. In Nick Haddad's book, these are the top 5 or 6 species of butterflies in terms of extinction. Some of these, like the bay checker spot, literally are found only on a few acres in California. And with the fires they recently had, I'm going to be interested in seeing if some of the habitat for some of these rare butterflies has now disappeared. Most of these species, incidentally, are found either in California or Florida. Okay. So this is from last season, and it was down to less than an acre. Maybe this last point should have been my first point. The National Wildlife Federation estimates that 42% of all North American species of birds, animals, plants are threatened by non-natives, not just insects. So the United States Geological Survey says they're aware of at least 6,500 harmful non-native insects in the United States. They cause about $100 billion a year in damage. And another study said that that's maybe another 25% of that 6,500 might be here that we haven't detected yet. Here's one example, the Japanese beetle. It's probably the most observed beetle in DuPage County if you go on iNaturalist and look, and probably in the United States. Research suggests it came up in the soil of some ornamental plants. And that's why a lot of insects, and in fact, a lot of non-native plants get introduced, that they're brought in hidden in the soil or on the plant itself. They're found throughout the eastern United States, and they're very harmful. The larvae and the adults feed on turf, landscape plants, crops, and they're pretty indiscriminate. Uh, our native plants, and a lot of are really haven't built up any tolerance to them. And a lot of the plants that we use for ourselves, fruits, vegetables, what have you, we've over the years made them less and less toxic, less bitter tasting. An example I like to use is right now there's dandelions out there. We'll pick some dandelion leaves and chew on them. Hard to believe that that's the source of what lettuce originally started out, very much like a dandelion. And the species is continuing to expand its range north and west. When I find them in my garden, one of the things I do is I just take a bucket of water that I put some dish detergent in, and I knock them into the water and drown them. That way I can avoid using sprays, pesticides, that sort of thing. Here's an insect that's gotten a lot of attention. Again, it seems to have been introduced on shipping containers and pallets. It was first seen in Pennsylvania in 2014, and in the last 10, 11 years, it's become a major threat. It's not a fly, it's what we call a true bug. And in Pennsylvania alone, they're guessing it's causing over $300 million in damage. Why isn't it a problem in Asia? Well, it has natural predators. Some of our birds and insects have started preying on them, but so far this really hasn't reduced their numbers. And it is able to outcompete and replace our native species. And there's a few native species we've introduced, non-native species we introduced. We had good intentions. Here's one, the Chinese mantis. If you've ever bought mantis egg cases online or at a garden center, chances are excellent they belong to this species. They replace our native Carolina mantis, which is green, and mm, they just seem kind of to escape. I mean, they're more successful. They're larger. This one I photographed probably not too far from the Woodridge Library uh, at a forest preserve, and you can see that it's captured a bee. Ladybugs. Ladybugs are great natural pest control. Here you see them. Those little orange specks are oleander aphids, a Mediterranean species of aphid that's now found widely in the United States. These were on some swamp milkweed that I grow in my garden. And you can see at the bottom an adult ladybug feeding on them. At the top, looks like a larva that's pupated and is becoming an adult. Ladybugs are great natural pest control. We have 19 species in DuPage County 18 of which are native. But the one that you're going to likely see the most often, the one that is sometimes sold or given away as a natural pest control, are called Asian ladybugs or Japanese ladybugs. They carry diseases that they're immune to, but which kill our native species. Uh, they're leading to loss of diversity and possible extinctions. These are the ladybugs that kind of swarm trying to get into your house as the weather cools down. They're pretty. If you've ever handled them, they're pretty nasty. They to defend themselves, they expel a fluid that's sticky. It's yellow. It stains. It smells, uh, and they're also very willing to bite. Something native ladybugs for some reason aren't. You can always tell them their appearance changes a lot. Some are dark red, some are orange, some are almost yellow. Number of spots can vary, but if you look at that thorax, that midsection, you can see it's white, and depending on your point of view, looks like it's marked with an X or a W or an M, and that's a sure sign that you're dealing with an Asian lady beetle, an Asian ladybug. I've included this. We've lived through a 17-year locust. Good example of a species whose population is cyclical. I was a year ago when they started coming out, I was taking care of my son's dog, a puppy, and dog loved eating them. He got very choosy about which ones he ate. Uh, they have different life cycles, which means they reduces the competition for the resources, and they serve a benefit. They're a major food for many species. Their larvae help aerate the soil, and they recycle soil nutrients. So they're not really, you might have found them annoying, but they're really not harmful. Now, I spend a lot of time in Florida, and I hear a lot about what are called love bugs, which are really a fly. They emerge twice a year in huge numbers usually. They motorists really hate them because they smash through clouds of them. And if you're in a farming section of Florida, and if it's not cleaned off the car within an hour or two, it gets hard. It's their body chemistry, I understand, can ruin the paint job. But the United States Department of Agriculture looks at them a little more closely, and they're maggots, like maggots of many flies, help decompose vegetation. The adults are a natural source of soil nutrients. They're a major food for a lot of other animals. One study said that only about 35% of non-native pests in this country, only 35% are pests in their countries of origin, and only 39% of US pests are native. So that means what? 60% of our pest insects are non-native. We've introduced them. And just to note that we have many threatened species. One's the Heinz Emerald's dragonfly. It's not far, it's found in a limited number of locations throughout the Midwest. One's very close to Woodridge, as a matter of fact. Just it's a special little marsh just off of I-55. And the soil and water conditions there help a species of crayfish, and the dragonfly larvae spend their lives in these crayfish holes. So why are we concerned about insects? Well, because all living things are interconnected. And we're finding out we're living through one of the sixth major extinction event, the Holocene. And animals and plants are becoming extinct faster than we can even learn what their role in nature is. There's various charismatic species that get a lot of attention, but these smaller species are really the foundation of a healthy ecosystem. As Wilson said, E.O. Wilson said, they're little things that run the world. So, these are three species I see in Florida: bald eagle, manatee, American alligator. Uh, the alligator and eagle are coming back, but of the three species, the only one that would really make a difference to its habitat if it became extinct would be the American alligator. They're actually important because of what they do to create pools of water in the Everglades when the dry season comes. A lot of us are bird watchers, and we just can't ignore that declines in the insect population are followed by declines in bird populations. Many species are insectivores that prey on insects their entire life. Like I said earlier, many seed-eating birds depend on insects to feed their nestlings. And now that migration is beginning, the wood warblers, like this little palm warbler, rely on moth caterpillars during migration. If they don't find the moths, they leave an area or they die. Right next to the Woodridge Library on Woodridge Drive, there's a nice little oak woodland, and I have never bird watched there, but I suspect that next few weeks, if that area hasn't been infected by pesticides, you're going to see warblers there in greater numbers and greater diversity than you may in other parts of DuPage County. So what are some things you can do to help? Well, I think you've taken the first step. Uh, the decline in birds received some attention. Monarchs are receiving attention now, but all insects are really deserving of our concern. So one of the things is simply limit use of pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers. I spoke to a woman who was a vice president of one of the large chemical companies that produces fertilizers and pesticides and so on. She said their studies of how people use their products suggest most end users, whether they're homeowners or commercial farmers, agriculturists, use 6 to 8 times the amount the company recommends. Another thing you can do is leave your leaves or rake them off to the side. Let them decompose. Let insects spend the winter in there. It's not much of a problem yet now because of LED lights, but you could turn off your lights at night if you can. And as much as possible, plant native plants. The white oak are known to host over 500 species of moths. Doug Ptolemy said now it's really important for home gardeners to realize that we can make a difference, that we're needed to help sustain all ecosystems. The preserves aren't doing the job. He recently pointed out that if you're a homeowner, you've taken possession of a piece of land that's part of a great ecosystem, and that comes with a responsibility. So when you start doing this, you can start small. You just don't have to be perfect. You don't have to turn your whole lawn into a pollinator garden. It'd be nice if you could, but I would suggest not. First of all, if you're like most lawns, have very few native plants, and basically lawns with non-native ornamental plantings have 75% fewer insects. In our average yard, starting with the grass, is 56 or more percent non-native plants. Our native birds require native plants. One study said that if a yard contains more than 30% non-native ornamentals, chances of chickadees actually wanting to breed there are very slim. Perfect lawns, plush green lawns, are basically food deserts for insects. And so one suggestion is to replace as much lawn with native wildflowers. And here's one. It's called butterfly milkweed or butterfly weed. It's a member of the milkweed family. Monarchs, caterpillars are seldom found on it, but a variety of insects do visit its flowers. And it's important to remember that butterflies that come from caterpillars. You know, if you got a nice, pretty flower garden, yeah, that's a punch bowl for the adults, but caterpillars need a salad bar, suitable host plants, like this monarch caterpillar on a milkweed. And if you look underneath, you can see the coriander oleander aphids have arrived. And not all native plants are equal. Hybrids and cultivars are also sterile. They don't attract butterflies. You want to use straight species plants. Um, right now, I'm sure if you go online, look at park districts, Morton Arboretum, the Forest Preserve District, a lot of groups are having native plant sales. I just gave this presentation to the Batavia Plain Dirt Gardeners, and they have a big plant sale coming up sometime in May. Uh, and it sounds like it's quite the event. So I've described myself sometimes to people. If Doug Ptolemy is a rock star, then I'm a cover band. So I really want to suggest other places where you can find a lot more information and get a lot more answers. National Wildlife Federation has a site, Garden for Wildlife. If you enter your zip code, you'll get a list of native plants and that do well in your garden and where you can purchase them. You can also purchase them through the website. National Audubon Society has a similar resource at audubon.org/plants. Xerces Society's website offers suggestions. The North American Butterfly Association has suggestions. And these are some of the ones I like for my own garden. Right now, big swath of my yard is covered with Virginia bluebell. Later on, the purple coneflower is going to come up, and that gets a lot of attention. I have wild geraniums. And in the fall, uh, I have New England asters, gray-headed coneflower, goldenrods. I'm putting together a program on goldenrods because I find them kind of fascinating for the insect community they support. But all of these, it's important to remember that insects come out in the spring, end of March, beginning of April, and all the way through fall, October, even November. At the ends of the seasons, there are fewer and fewer resources for them. These natural plants, these native plants, I should say, are really good at attracting these insects, and they do very well. And a little project that I started last year, and so far without a whole lot of success, is I wanted to help carpenter bees. They can be problematic if you have painted wood like a deck or so on. Painting it or staining it usually prevents any problems. They look at it like a small bumblebee. They're a little less hairy. What they do is they nest in holes. They'll lay an egg. They'll stock the hole with pollen, and then lay an egg in it, and or several eggs sometimes. So what I did is I took some logs, I drilled some 1/4-inch holes, and I'm leaving them out where if a bee finds it, it's going to have a hole. You can actually go to garden centers, I've noticed, and buy a little more attractive nesting habitats. So here's a carpenter bee, and it's doing something that's kind of interesting. It doesn't go in the flower. It's called robbing, and it bites the flower off at the base and sucks the nectar out that way. But if you look at this one, those little spots you see on it, that's pollen. So it still helps move pollen from flower to flower. So I wouldn't dismiss insects. I mean, they're good and they need our protection and attention. So I'm ready for some questions. I want to thank you again. I want to thank George for inviting me, and I know some of you have watched me in the past with my bird programs. I hope you learned something here tonight, or at least question what I said, so you'll look into it for yourself. I would suggest you start looking and appreciating the insects around you. So, George, that's the end of the program. If I want to get it back to you.
Great. Thank you, John. If anyone in the audience has a question, you'll see a Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. If you want to click on that and go ahead and type in your question, John will be able to see your questions and answer them. So go ahead and type in your questions. No questions. We are open for questions. There's one.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it on my screen. Oh, wait, here it is. I see more. What's that? If I click on more.
I see one
Oh, that's something.
question. Someone,
Okay, I
anonymous,
got it.
thank you very much for such an informative talk.
Oh, well, thank you.
We have another one.
Okay, I'm going to answer. Judy's question is excellent. Judy, um, I think it was Michigan State University or Western Michigan. I forget which of the two schools did a study. They compared and they studied annuals, bedding annuals that were bought in the United States and Europe. And it turned out there were 6 species. Off the top of my head, I can't remember them all, except that I'm a fan of New Guinea impatiens. Let's see, there were impatiens, New Guinea impatiens, begonias, geraniums. It turns out that the 6 most popular species of bedding plants sold in nurseries are of almost no value as for pollinators. Zinnias and marigolds are much better. Anything in the daisy family would works better. Here's a big issue, though. They're treating those plants with pesticides. The Xerces Society found, I want to say, like just amount with milkweeds bought in nursery garden centers and places like the Home Depot, found that there were 60 some different pesticides. The average plant had about 12 different pesticides in it, on it. So I would suggest either growing things from seeds yourself, or perhaps going online trying to find a native plant cell. Yeah, it's I'm still probably going to go to Home Depot or Lowe's or actually Menards and buy some New Guinea impatiens for some planters I have by our doorway. My wife likes them, but I'm cognizant that they are virtually useless in terms of helping insects. Mary Lou wants to know, where on Woodridge Drive did you see birds? I haven't birded that area, Mary Lou, but there's that oak woodland.
Can I jump in?
Yeah,
I
because
drive by there every day. It's Hawthorne Hill Woods along Woodridge Drive, and they're actually putting a recreational trail in there. And in fact, I think it's mostly done at this point.
and like I said, Mary Lou, it looks very promising to me, only because for this time of year, spring, because of the oak trees. Warblers, I'd be interested in seeing if red-headed woodpeckers move in. Red-headed woodpeckers used to be very common in DuPage County. Then red-bellied woodpeckers moved in, and the red-headed became less common. More and more people are seeing pileated woodpeckers, which are the size of crows. I think part of the reason is our woodlands in DuPage County are reaching kind of a mature stage. At the time of settlement in the early 1840s, half of DuPage County was prairie almost, and the other half was marshland. The irony of having forest preserves is that before settlement, there wasn't much forest to preserve in DuPage County. But the Arboretum, Lyman Woods, the area down by Waterfall Glen, even in Green Valley Forest Preserve, those woodlands are reaching a maturity level and attracting, I think, pileated woodpeckers. Mary Lou also said lemon gem marigolds. That's interesting. I do know that the study that was done by the university used marigolds and zinnias as a comparison, and I forget what varieties they have. That's part of a different presentation, but they were much, much better. Okay, Judy wants to know about plants to grow. For black swallowtails, I grow parsley, dill, and fennel. Excuse me. Or you can grow carrots. They like carrots. I like parsley because if nothing else, I use it when I cook. But it's amazing how much parsley one caterpillar can eat. I'm going to have, like, by the time it's done, I'm probably going to have a dozen 6-inch pots of parsley. And what they're intended for is I have a cage that I'm going to put in the parsley. If I see a caterpillar on the parsley, that plant's going in the cage. And every time I've done this, I've had success. Last year it was incredible. I raised about a dozen swallowtails to adulthood. I learned that if I see the caterpillar on the parsley, to act right away, because you come back 5 minutes later and it's disappeared. They're really good at concealing themselves. Okay, Judy talks about scarce having a plant cell. Nicole's asking about elected officials. That's what the organizations are really good at doing. Last summer, I testified before a committee of the DuPage County Board. There was a motion to increase the number of honeybee hives in DuPage County to help 4-H projects. And I spoke out against it only because of the impact honeybees have on native bees. We do have, I mentioned the Heinz Emerald Green dragonfly. We also have in DuPage County a bumblebee, rusty bumblebee, that's endangered. It's been seen, ironically, exactly in the less developed areas, let's put it that way, of DuPage County, Wayne Township, for example, more often than anywhere else. When I first moved to DuPage County, that was all agriculture. Now there's still, I guess, 4-H clubs up there. My sister lives in unincorporated, has had us when a wooded track next to her was cut down. It's interesting, Mary Lou, what was in that wooded track. I know I recommend in bird talks, if you're new to birding, always go someplace where there's some water. And it depends on what those trees were. A lot of trees in DuPage County are non-native. I'm embarrassed to say that the 2 big hardwood trees on my property are Norway maples, which are non-native. I've been living here going on 50 years, and until recently, raking up leaves every fall, and I've never seen a Norway maple leaf that looked like anything chewed on it. A chewed leaf is a good leaf. I like something Ptolemy says in one of his books. Basically, I'm going to paraphrase it, that if you grow a garden landscape just to look pretty, That's like cooking food just for the flavor and ignoring nutritional and health aspects of it. Yes, I could live on chocolate cake and donuts, but I don't think my doctors would approve of it. Nicole, you're right to worry that whatever the prairie is, uh, what's going on around it affects it. Um, prairies need a lot of work. I'm very active well, I've been very active at the Kirk Prairie at College of DuPage. It's where I monitor butterflies. It's where I take a lot of photographs that I use in my presentation. And the college has a natural areas manager. Anna does an excellent job. And before her, Remik did an excellent job trying to maintain the natural areas on the college. Things are slowly getting better. But when I monitor butterflies, a lot of the butterflies I see there are actually coming in for the nectar. There aren't any of their host plants. For example, the trees on the prairie that grow there are cottonwood trees. And when I see a tiger swallowtail, those big yellow and black ones, I'm trying to remember what the species is that their larvae eat, what tree leaves, but they're not cottonwood trees and they're not sycamore trees. So, yes, those protected areas do deserve our concern. And if there's a site, if there's a way that you can do stewardship, you can personally get involved in protecting that prairie area. Oh, Judy, I'm glad you like my photos. Yeah, I sometimes I let this out. My wife's a musician, among other things, and I quite often my evenings are spent wherever she's performing. And I say I photograph nature, but I shoot musicians. Um, the musicians appreciate it. They know where I'm coming from. So, but well, I appreciate everything. I appreciate your questions. I appreciate George and the Woodridge Library giving me a chance to express this. Like I said, you know, I'm probably the cover band for a lot of people out there, a lot of people doing original research like Doug, and more totally involved in it than I can be. But I have a variety of programs, and I share with George what my programs are, and I will continue to do that over the years. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, John. Excellent program.
Thank you.
We look forward to having you back.
Okay, I look forward to coming back.
Take care now. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.